Well, you're joined here by none other than Blueprings, myself. And the other day I was like looking back at my post that I made on the Blue Life, and it was actually the cover. The first like post is actually from School of Grappling, and I'll read you the quote. All combat is a battle of space, time, and resources. That's why you need to study the fundamental principles that govern combat in general, right? So remember three things: space, time, and resources. Three important things that essentially determine the outcome in every form of combat. I remember this was actually not even an official post. It was actually on his story, and I had to screenshot it because it was a very excellent observation from him. You know? Space. What is space? And we'll go over the first one. What is space? The distance between you and the enemy. Right? Essentially, are you in attacking range? Or are you outside of that attacking range? Right? And again, even when you are in your attacking range, am I vulnerable? Or is he more vulnerable? In what situation? Right? Second one, time. What is time? The initiative of attack in a successive manner at the right moment, right? Which basically, if we simplify it, it basically means, you know, essentially the process of attack. It's not necessarily who attacks first. That's not what it is, right? It's in a successive manner, right? The right moment to attack, right? Because one of the principles of counter fighting, right, or even what Jack Dempsey says, aggressive defense. It's essentially it's about that style of fighting. Like the people aren't necessarily attacking first, right? So you're actually baiting the person to attack so that they could counter, right? As we've seen famously with Conor McGregor, right? He's an example where he baits the person to attack, he dodges to the right. I mean, actually to his left, my bad. Yeah, to the opponent's right, right? Because they throw the right hand. This works in open stance, orthodox southpaw, right? Vice versa. And basically, he baits them in, throws out left hand, right? That's a successive manner at the right moment, right? So as the opponent overextends, he has left himself open, right? Because every time you attack, you kind of do leave yourself vulnerable, right? This is striking or grappling, right? When you go for a takedown, right? Like for example, a single leg. Depending on where your head is, you are susceptible to a guillotine or some form of like a choke, right? Maybe even a front headlock, which could transition to the dorsal anaconda, etc., etc. Right, and the last one, resources. What is resources? The variety of tools capable of defeating the enemy. Right. This is a very important part right here. The variety of tools capable of defeating the enemy. Right? We can take this in combat sports or in warfare. Right? Usually the side with the better tools is the one that wins. Right? Right? And not just the better tools, but quality, I mean, quantity doesn't always, quality more so, but if you're quality and quantity, then you are extremely overpowered in any realm of like endeavor, essentially, of combat. And I'll give you an example, right? The more well-rounded the fighter is, the better chance he has of winning, right? It's not the end-all be-all, but I'll give you an example, GSP, right? There really isn't any like fight that he will do bad in. Why? Because he's so well-rounded, his striking, his grappling, right? He can attack you in both manners, right? And of course, like he trains with best grapplers, best strikers, right? And not only is he good at singular martial arts, but he knows how to amalgamate them so well, right? To use his striking with his grappling with his striking, right? Or even the in-betweens like ground and pound, I mean, he might not be Khabib level with ground and pound, but he for sure is aware of that, and he could use that to set up submission or stand back up and continue striking. Right, and in warfare we can establish the same thing. Right, tools, instead of it being combative skills, I guess. I mean, you should, of course, need skill in warfare, but it's weapons here in warfare, right? Right, there's a reason. I'll just use a historical example, right? When the Europeans came over to the Americas, there's a reason why they wiped out majority of the Native Americans. They just simply had the better tools, right? More advanced tools, right? Europeans were more used to, well, like in their history, right? They were more used to fighting, foes that were more advanced, essentially in warfare, right? Right, like, with the people in the East, right, or even the north of Africa, right? They were more used to that, right? So they had to develop more tools, right? Right, such as gunpowder, for example, right? That's such a huge advantage, right? Whereas Native Americans, all they had was bow and arrow, spears. I don't even think they had swords. To be honest, I don't even think they had swords, right? Europeans had it all, right? It was case closed, easy victory for them because they had the tools capable of defeating these enemies. And on top of that, they also had horses too. It's so many tools, right? So these three things are very important, okay? Space, time, and resources, right? So the person who can apply all three of these things essentially is the one who will have the most likely outcome to win, okay? And I feel like when I realized this, it was a very good point. And it essentially opened my eyes because, like combat, it's all related. Art of war, it's all related, right? Whether it's MMA or warfare, right? Even like sports, like I see like football or soccer, basketball, right? Even these, but you can see that even in there, right? Space, time, and resources thing is even prevalent in those sports, which are not necessarily combat based, right? But the idea generally stays the same, and that's why it's very important to notice these fundamental principles, especially in combat. And I hope you all learn something of value here that you can apply. And yeah, you probably could apply these in life too, but especially in combat. But I haven't necessarily dived too deep into it. You know what I mean? This is just, I've only dived essentially in the realm of combat. And if you go on the post, you can actually see where I have a picture of. Actually, I believe the first. Actually, yeah, I mean, this actually is a picture that was from his story, so I shouldn't take credit for it completely. But just that first one is his, and the rest of it is mine. Okay. So, the octagon, chessboard, and then essentially army, like, how do I say this? It's basically like showing what the armies would do on the paper, right? This is how they would attack, right? Right? And like you could Google all this stuff, right? The one that I specifically put on the second post was when Alexander the Great fought Darius of Persia, right? I believe this was the Battle of Gaugamela, if I'm not mistaken, right? You can see all space that is between him and the Persians, right? Right. Now, obviously, there's a range here, right, with the arrows. That the arrow can only go so far, right? Right. And then now you have close combat. I shouldn't say close combat, but basically close weapons like swords and spears, right? Right. They don't go as far, right? But they are more effective in the sense of close range, right? Whereas arrows are more effective in long range, right? Now in the above picture, what do you see? You see Conor McGregor, Jose Aldo, right? Of course, there's a distance between them when they fight. One thing that's very interesting here is in MMA, specifically, right? They start off very far from one another, right? Unlike in wrestling or grappling, where they start off a lot closer, right? Literally, they're like right next to each other, right? But in boxing, kickboxing, right? They stand at the edge of the ring, right? So I like that. MMA kind of took the striking side and like they established further range so that you would have to work for your close distance because I feel like it just wouldn't be as real. You know what I mean? So it's better for you to work for your distance. Yes, it puts the strikers at an advantage, but they're already an advantage when every fight starts standing up. You know. Right. And to further, I just want to further break this down. Essentially, time. Right. Now, what do you see here? You see Alexander the Great. That's a picture of Alexander the Great on his horse, Bucephalus, right, with a spear, driving through a Persian. His in his throat, essentially, right, or about to. And you see Conor McGregor landing that left hand he knocked out Jose Aldo with. Right. The reason I chose this picture was because that left hand is in the same motion that spear, right? Right. It pulls attacked at the right time in a successive manner, right? This is what Alexander the Great was known for, and of course, Conor in this like heyday of primehood, essentially, that's what he was known for, right? Was that timing, right? He said it best, right? Timing beats speed, right? Accuracy beats power, right? That's essentially what it is, right? It doesn't matter how powerful your army is if you don't know how to attack with them in a successful manner, right? Just as it doesn't matter how powerful your punch is if you don't know how to attack with it in a successive manner, right? And finally, resources. Why did I choose this one again? I was thinking about this, and maybe I should have chosen a picture of GSP, but like, then I realized that, I had Conor McGregor throughout the first two, so I may as well finish with him. Right. But resources were resources. Actually, I'll tell you the first two pictures up. Right, the armies. What do you see? You see Alexander's Great on his horse. He's got a spear, long, right, and a shield, right. He probably has a sword on there too, but you obviously can't see that in the picture. And what do you see behind him? A phalanx, right. And what do the phalanx have? Long ass spears, right. And of course they have swords too, right, with shields, right. The phalanx was very successful. Right. It was essentially what Alexander the Great used in pretty much like every war that he was in. Right, and in the second picture, what is that? Right, if I'm not mistaken, right, that is an ancient ballista, which is basically, it's just like an overpowered arrow thrower. Essentially, that's what it is, right? It's a type of ancient machinery, which I was surprised to learn. Right? I don't even know if that's what it was called, ballista. I forgot the name, but that's essentially what it is. Right? That's basically a tool right there. Resources, right? It's a big advantage right there. Right? I think to throw arrows further, right, from a greater distance. Probably any archer out there, right? And then on top of that, what is the other advantage? It can probably produce more force on top of that if it lands, right? And now, Conor, what are his resources, right? Primarily, it is his boxing and his timing, right? That's what it mostly is, and his taekwondo, of course, right? His grappling more so is jiu-jitsu based, right? With more of an emphasis on takedown defense, right? Now, some people are gonna argue and say takedown defense is not good or whatever, but I'm saying that's what he primarily focuses on, right? right? He's obviously southpaw, right? Right. He is. He likes to use more his rear hand than his front hand, right? He's not primarily known for having like like a like, like a really good jab, right? But he's very good for knowing his left hand, right? Right. Very good at slipping, right? Timing, right? Bobbing and weaving. Well, not necessarily bobbing and weaving, more so slipping. We're being honest here. So he also has a very good front kick, right? Right. Right. In his prime, he was very fluid, right? Essentially like Bruce Lee, right? Right. He had a very good front kick, front snap kick, rear snap kick, right? Right. Which is another Taekwondo technique, right? But this, I hope you all can see how and like why essentially these three are important in all forms of combat, right? Space, time, and resources, right? Literally fundamental principles right here, right? You know, this post has a lot more. When you really think about it, you see it essentially in every fight, right? And like, you probably see it in any war too, right? These are the three things that matter. You need all three of them to be successful, right? Because if you don't have space, right, you don't know essentially right the distance between you and the enemy. Like, how are you supposed to land anything, and how do you expect to dodge anything that he throws at you, right? How do you expect to evade anything, essentially, right? Right. And time, if you don't have time, right? Like, are you just gonna throw attacks out there, like at just random, right? Without consciously thinking about, okay, when am I gonna attack, right? Again, this should be done before an actual combat scenario, right, in your training. But you like in combat, you will notice like, okay, it's open, right? And I'm speaking in general sense, right? MMA or warfare, that you will notice it, right? You will notice, okay, the enemy's open here. Oh, they're open here. Oh, he does this. Okay, he keeps doing this. He's making this mistake, right? As Napoleon said, actually, yeah, as Napoleon said, he said, do not interrupt your enemy when he's making a mistake, right? That's essentially, that's because that's when you attack, right? That's when you attack, right? If you don't have resources, So, I mean, this one you could, sometimes you can get away with it, right? There are obviously many cases in history, and even in warfare, right, where a smaller army has defeated a bigger army, right, even if it was a very powerful empire, right? Funny enough, Alexander the Great, right? Actually, I was gonna say he would have done this with the Persians, but like I would say the Persians had a bigger army, but what did he have? I would say his army probably had like better weapons, if I'm being honest, right? The resources, right? Whereas the Darius' army had more numbers and like probably elephants, cavalry, right? Right. This one, I don't want to say it doesn't matter, but there's like a chance of a fluke happening. Essentially, is all I'm saying, right? We've seen it in history, right? Smaller army defeating a big army, right? Many times, and it's not even just numbers, right? Even the army with the less capable tools can overcome this, right? If they have the other two as well, space and the time, right? But obviously, it's better to have more tools in your arsenal than the enemy, because if you have all three, you are just all overpowered, essentially, right? That left hand, right, is what Conor McGregor has, right? As I discussed previously, front snap kick, Taekwondo kicks, right? That's what he has, right? Fluidity, right? Combining those strikes together in an efficient manner, and that's what he has, right? Right. That's basically what he has. I hope you guys all learned a valuable thing. Right, listening to me talk about, essentially why these three things are very important in combat. Right. Right. but I would appreciate it. I feel like I have pretty much stated pretty much everything I can about this so far, at least. Right? Maybe I can come back to it if I think of anything else in another video. But you know, please like and subscribe. To this channel, and you can continue hearing more about the great advice that I have on this subject. Because I have studied this pretty extensively. It would be a shame if I didn't share this to the world. Until next time, Assalamu alaikum.